Thanks for joining us for In Studio from Simply Timeless. I'm your host, Jay Daniels. Last year, I had the pleasure of speaking with West Coast vocalist Nicolas Bearde. Back in 2019, he had released an album filled with standards made popular by Nat King Cole. That release was called I Remember You. During our interview, Nicolas not only remembers his love for the music of Nat Cole, but also some of the influences he had along his musical journey. He'll share the memories of his service in the Air Force while stationed in Japan, as well as his years of working with artists like Bobby McFerrin. His story begins in East Nashville, Tennessee, and that's where our conversation starts with Nicolas Bearde.
It was interesting. It was actually kind of Mayberry-ish in a way, but in the black community. I grew up in East Nashville in a part of town that was predominantly black. We actually had some railroad tracks that you would cautiously cross from time to time. And we had I lived in my youngest days, I lived right across the street from a public park. And on the opposite side of the park was a large wooded area, which of course became Fantasyland and Playland, and was filled with adventure and intrigue and trees to climb and bushes to run through and turtles and it was an amazing little space for a kid to grow up. Now the kids of these days probably can't relate to running through the woods, but it was just a thing of joy for us. And we had a large creek in the park, which was filled with crayfish, and every now and then a minnow or two would come through. So we spent a lot of time, and this is from, I think we moved there when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And being in the South at that time, you could just leave the house. You would just be kicked out for the day, go out and play, if you weren't in school. And we'd run into the park, and we'd run way through the woods and down in the creek, and, be walking through the creek. And, it was a really kind of a fantastical, kind of lovely little childhood. Yeah, didn't have a lot of urban issues to deal with, gangs and all that kind of stuff, but we did have some little conflict with the white kids that lived across the tracks who would occasionally come into the area. The worst thing that happened usually was a rock battle, throwing rocks at each other, that kind of thing. But I actually made a friend of one of those kids, and we were friends pretty much until I left high school. And much to the chagrin of his people, he would come and spend the day with me. I never met his parents or anybody from his community, but he would come and spend the day with me. We'd go hang out with my friends and play and all of that kind of stuff. So it was kind of a really interesting way to grow up. And it was a kind of an insular black community. Churches and businesses were pretty much all black run and owned and operated. So it was an interesting way to grow up.
Music still played an important role even in your childhood, and you had a very special relationship with your mother, from what I read.
Well, yeah, my father died when I was about 10. So my mother, has 7 kids. It was 4 boys and 3 girls, and my mother had to raise us all. And of course, in the South, you generally get taught how to cook and iron and clean up and all that kind of stuff, do laundry and whatever else. Anyway, most of the kids of my generation usually acquired those skills because the parents were out working most of the time. So, you had to learn how to do that, and most of the parents would insist on that. So we were pretty independent in that regard. And so my mother didn't have to worry about us too much. The older kids took care of the younger kids, kind of thing. And I'm the second of the 7. So I was, of course, tasked with keeping the younger ones in line, much to their chagrin.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because I am a Virgo. And, it was, we're pretty independent. And so that kind of dovetails into my mother and my relationship. We were pretty independent-minded kids, and me probably more so than anybody in the family. Myself and my sister, the oldest of the 3 girls, who was a year behind me, we're both pretty independent-minded, and we sort of marched our own drummers. And my mother, I think, in an offhand, we kind of appreciated that, although she would get a little irritated with me being late to school and that kind of thing. But she certainly had a love of music that transferred to me, and she never played an instrument as far as I could tell, but she instilled her love of music into me and my sister, most notably. So that my sister, little known to me until later, till many years later after college and whatnot, my sister actually became a concert violinist, and we never saw her practice at home.
So, how did that turn out then, I wonder?
I have no idea. I mean, I was the singer. My oldest brother played drums and percussion in marching band, and my sister, who's the third in line, became a concert violinist. I have no idea where she practiced or where she even had an instrument. I never saw her with an instrument in her hand. But, she became a violinist, and just not for very long. She didn't have a career or anything, but, coming out of school and into college, she played violin. So something of note. But yeah, my mother and I, we just had this kind of relationship where it was just not a lot of things had to be said. I was the one who would creep through the hallways and listen to her and her girlfriends as they partied and talked about music and talked about the guys that, like Cam Calloway, they loved to see his hair flopping around, that kind of thing.
the Heidi High man right there.
Heidi ho, yeah. And they'd be in there talking about, girl, can you imagine what it looked like with that hair laying on the pillow in the morning? Things like that.
Now, Nicholas, this is a family program.
This is a family program. As far as I will go with that. But
that's okay.
This is, of course, is after my father. My father had long since passed by quite a few years when these conversations were going on. But, I used to listen to this jazz and this jump swing and stuff that they were listening to. It was quite interesting because it was not my generation was listening to more of the Motown dance music and kind of party music. And so I came up with a love of not only the Motown music, but also this jazz music, which I didn't really understand at the time, and a lot of it kind of made me a little uncomfortable because I didn't know what it was until high school. And in high school, I had an experience with a friend by the Jamaican guy by the name of Derek, who had transferred into our high school, and we began to hang out a little bit and come to find out he was kind of a hipster in a way, He was listening to Dylan, he was listening to the Stones, he was listening to Beatles, and more importantly, he was listening to Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock and, all of this kind of stuff, things that just really broadened my spectrum of music, because I'd been listening to all the Johnny Mathis and Dionne Warwick, and the Motown, some classical music, things like that. But he put this other element into my view, and we would go. I mean, the first time I listened to any jazz that I really understood was Miles Davis doing "Someday My Prince Will Come," with Ron Carter on bass and all of that. And I got it, man. Jay, I'm telling you, I got it. I understood that this was something on a deep level, and I understood the language. It just made sense to me. I think prior to that, I'd never really sat down and listened to a jazz piece all the way through because it just, like I said, this kind of made me unsettled a little bit. I shouldn't say uncomfortable, but it unsettled me a little bit. It wasn't the kind of predictable form that I was used to hearing with R&B and that kind of thing. But listening to that piece, "Someday My Prince Will Come," the way Miles played it, it had all the beauty and the power and the drive. That driving bass line was just, oh my goodness. And I was a changed man from that point on. And I think that was in my junior year in the high school. Derek and I used to go out to Fisk University. And I don't know who started this, but he and I would go into the women's dorm, the girls' dorm, and we would confiscate their music, their kind of lounge. because they had a great Kenwood stereo system in there with these gigantic speakers. And we would just sit in the lounge and play records, and nobody questioned us. Every now and then somebody would come by with a raised eyebrow, like, "What are you doing in here?" Because this is the girls' dorm. But nobody ever questioned it.
Yeah, just two guys listening to songs. Yeah, we were
two
invited
guys
here.
Just listening to music, and we're listening to all this incredible music on this incredible system. And Jay, I got to tell you, I mean, those are some of the best nights. And we weren't drinking or anything like that. There's no drugs or anything like that going on. Just sitting there listening. Well, and we lay on the floor. We had pillows on the floor and that kind of thing. So we were very, very cool, you might say. I think you could smoke cigarettes in there at the time. So I'm sure we probably lit up a few cigarettes while we were listening.
I mean, if you wanted to be like a classic jazz club, you had to have smoke filling the room. You had
to have a smoke. Exactly.
So now, did you attend college at Fisk, or where did you go for your education?
No, Fisk is where the pretty girls went. You see, and I went to Tennessee, what is now Tennessee State.
Were they not so pretty over at Tennessee State?
Well, they were more of a working class.
Oh. I shouldn't be saying this.
There were pretty girls there.
I want to get emails on this. How dare you
sure
say
you will.
that pretty girls are not over there?
Now, this is a long time ago. Things have changed, so it's all balanced out now. But no, Fisk is where the wealthier class went, or at least perceived to be that. And I was more locals kind of went there because it was, cost-wise, it was not as damaging cost-wise. And I went to Tennessee State, and actually it was called Tennessee A&I at the time, Agricultural and Industrial at the time. But that's where Wilma Rudolph and all that great Olympic track team came out of Tennessee State at that time. So I went there for a very brief time. Less than a year, because I realized that sitting in the student union playing bid whist and drinking rum and Coke was not conducive to educational needs. And so I actually took the opportunity to go into the military at that time.
Which branch did you go into?
I went into the Air Force. And I kind of went in as a joke. Me and a buddy were hanging out downtown, and just happened to be by the recruiter's office, and we said, "Hey, let's go in and take these tests, this little jive test." And took the test. And said, "Oh, well, you have this ability and you have that ability, and you want to sign up?" And during the Vietnam era, and we just decided we would go through the motions, and then when we got down to the time to get on the plane or the bus or the train or whatever, then we'd cut off the joke. We'd say, "Okay, thanks a lot. We had fun. We're going to leave." It turned out he was a year too young to go in. And I said, "You know what? I don't have anything else to do here. Let me just go through this. Let me just see what this is about." And I wound up signing and enlisting in the Air Force at that time, which was probably the best thing I could have done at that point in my life, because it gave me some regimen, gave me some education. I became electronic technician, radar specialist, and I went to Japan through the military. So, I got an education in many ways. Yeah, and it was the beginning of my professional life as a singer, as an entertainer as well.
How long were you stationed in Japan?
Well, I was stationed there 2 years, and it was not enough because I actually wanted to stay longer, get to know more about the culture, and I had a very good thing going. I became a part of one of the dominant bands in the area, so we had a tour bus. We performed in cities all over Japan, usually on the weekend. And I pretty much worked a 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 gig for the Air Force, and then after that, you were pretty much on your own. So, I was a working musician, and while I was still in the military, and so we got to see the best of both worlds. And the clubs there were fantastic, and it was very competitive. So you really had to put on a good show. It wasn't just getting up there and singing a couple songs. You actually had to costume yourself. You had to do dance routines. You had to do the whole nine, with a band. We had a 10-piece band with a horn section and all that. And it was serious business. It was the first time I'd ever had done a professional gig, even though I'd been singing most of my life, doing doo-wopping, that kind of thing, and doing talent shows and things of that nature. I'd never been in a place where I had to work at that level. And it was very, very gratifying.
Between your time in Japan and now, you have had quite a varied career, not only in music, but in also another one of the performing arts. You dabbled in acting for several years, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I started out in theater. I did a play in 83, I believe it was, 83 or 84, which featured Danny Glover in a starring role. And this was in theater, as I say. And it was a local production by the KPFA radio station here. This production that Danny Glover was starring in was a simulcast live production, as well as simulcast on KPFA radio, and which was going out around the world as well. But it was a live staged production. So there was a hand combat on the side stage. There was sound effects. There were six or eight mic positions, and I was one of the singers involved in this. And there were I think 9 singers. And so everything, there was live action, there was a dialogue, there was all of that stage combat, all of that going on. And Danny was the star of this production. And it was just it was a coming together of all the artistic communities in this Bay Area. So the theater community came together, the radio community came together, stage and film actors came together. Athala Shabazz, who was Malcolm X's, I think she's the oldest daughter or the second daughter, was part of the production staff. You name it in the Bay Area, artistic community, they were all involved in this production. So it was something that really opened my eyes up to theater and film and that sort of thing. And of course, with Danny being the star, many people were, of course, wanting to be around him. And at this time, he was filming. I believe he was filming the first of the Lethal Weapons.
Yes.
I think he was filming that, and so he would come up from L.A. and wherever he was filming and come to rehearse the show and just run through it, and he'd pass out between his scenes, So and we had one of those days we had a conversation, and I said, Danny, so I'm really taken to this acting. What should I do? How should I approach it? And he had just given this whole speech about how there were a couple of the young actors there who sort of calling him on the carpet, but not really, about not bringing in other actors of color into into his sphere. And he just said like it is. He says, "Man, I can't bring everybody in. It's not like I have the power to open that door. And by the way, if I brought you in, what do you have to offer? I can't just bring you in because you're another black man or black woman. You got to bring something with you. There has to be something that you're bringing to the table, more or less." Which I thought was, which was the way it needed to be said. But I did ask him. I said, what should I do as a young man wanting to go into this field? And he said, well, go to this teacher, and her name was Jean Shelton, one of the great acting teachers in the realm. And I went and studied at Jean's for a year, and booked the very first production that I auditioned for when I came out of study. And from that point on, it was just theater, interspersed with some club gigs and all that kind of stuff. But mostly it was theater for the first 2 or 3 years, just back-to-back plays. And kind of all because of Danny's guidance. So that's how I got to know him.
I wonder what might have happened had you kept theater as your primary vehicle for a career. Did you ever? I mean, did you see theater as being long term, or were you thinking, maybe?
Oh, no, never. No, music has always been first. Theater was a fascinating thing to do, and it was a path that I wanted to explore. I never had aspirations for film necessarily. I just wanted to do. I really enjoyed theater, really enjoyed the immediacy of it, and the challenge of doing something every night and bringing something new and fresh to it every night, while maintaining the character and that sort of thing. It's a very difficult craft to master. Man, when you see the New York actors, what they do to prepare and how consistent they are in their deliveries and their characterizations, it is something to behold. And that's kind of where I wanted to be with it. But, music was conflicting, because music is a nighttime event, but usually around the same time that you're in the theater. So I was faced with the choice of how much theater will I do versus being in the clubs, being on stage singing. And music went out.
There was a time in the late 80s you began working with Bobby McFerrin. What a talented guy.
Right. 1986, yeah.
And you helped to form an a cappella group that worked alongside him for several years thereafter. Voicestra, the name of that group.
Well, that was his creation, and that was something he wanted to do. It didn't have a name yet when he brought us on board. It was just an idea that he wanted to pursue, which was basically a live vocal orchestra, which is where the name comes from, but voices. And it wasn't to imitate a band or anything like that. It was to do something completely different, to use the human voice as the human voice and not mimicking instruments and that kind of thing. That wasn't his goal. And so we started, he brought a bunch of people together through recommendations of people he knew in the area. And he was living here in the Bay Area at the time, so it was more convenient to do it this way. And we got together, about 15 singers and Bobby, and got together in the studio and just created some stuff for about 4 hours. And he said, yeah, let's do this. So he would put together engagements, and we'd go out to some local venues here and put these gigs together. And the people would come out in droves. I mean, just sold out houses and all that. Because, we were all kind of known singers in the area, most of us. And, of course, there's Bobby, who was a phenom at the time because he just put out his first album, the one with Moonshadow and all that stuff on it. And he was working with Robin Williams from time to time. And, I think, Don't Worry, Be Happy had just come out. I may have the chronology a little incorrect there, but Don't Worry, Be Happy had given him a lot of cachet, you might say. And so this was an exciting thing to be with an artist of his stature and that kind of thing. But this was an idea he wanted to pursue, to do something completely different, something completely unexpected from him. And at one point he said that he'd gotten tired of singing lyrics. He just wanted to do just creative avant-garde kind of stuff. And that was the path that we started working on. But, of course, some of the early songs did have lyrics, of course. But a lot of what we did live was spontaneous creation, more long tones and staccato tones and that kind of thing. They weren't focused around lyrics per se.
How many years were you in that ensemble?
Well, technically, I'm still in it. I guess you might say we never really we got to a point mid-'90s when I think finances were a little strained, and we took a break for a number of years, and then we came back early 2000 to do some engagements in Europe. And that was a resurgence of the group, and I think that was 2004 when we came back together. In the meantime, we had taken several of us from the group in the mid-'90s, decided to stay together, and formed a group called Sovo So, Sovoso, which carried on the work that Bobby was doing and added some other elements, like some R&B elements and that kind of thing to it. A little more structure in some of the pieces that we did. But we still worked within that theme that he had set up, not doing traditional vocal work. It's not doo-wop kind of thing. There were 7 or 8 of us when we broke off, and we just went off on our own path with his blessing, of course. So we continued along that path, and then we found a name for ourselves, which was Sovo So, because we used the Voicestra name for a little bit, but we would have to ask permission to do that, all that kind of thing. And then we just went off on our own and became Sovo So, which I stayed with until 1999, which is when I decided to go off on my own.
And if I have my records correct here, you formed your own label right around the same time. And
1998.
And there was a solo project that you did called Crossing the Line. I believe that was your first for the label. Is that right?
That was the very first one, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Your latest is a collection of favorites as made popular by Nat Cole. The album is called I Remember You, the music of Nat King Cole. And in addition to your vocal talents, it also features a talented saxophonist named Eric Alexander, who just put out a strings album. My goodness.
Yeah, up-and-coming guy. Up-and-coming guy, yeah.
So I want to start here, if I can, in the moments that we have. You were talking about your mom and her girlfriends, and they loved listening to Cab Calloway, and I think they even listened to Billy Eckstine as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Mr. B.
Absolutely, yes.
So
yes.
When did you hear Nat Cole?
Oh, around that time. Around that time, we were listening to Nat Cole when I was young and at home. In fact, that Sunday, that summer was one of my favorite tunes from that era.
Mm.
So, and I was a teenager. I was in high school, and that's when I heard that music. Some of Nat's work was getting, well, I don't mean this.
I know what you're going to say, but go ahead and say it.
Well, it was getting kind of corny at that time. Well, I shouldn't say corny, but the perception in the community with the kids with some of this, like Lazy Hazy Days of Summer.
I was going to say that exact same.
Rambling Rose. Yeah, it was getting to be kind of Mitch.
Mitch Miller?
Oh, what was his name? Mitch Miller, yes. Yeah, it was kind of getting off into Mitch Miller, and, it wasn't hip in the black community necessarily. But, of course, there's other chestnuts, like Tenderly and all that stuff. That was all highly respected. But, for kids at that time, for teenagers, that wasn't quite the thing. But that Sunday, that summer, things like that, man, I love that stuff, yeah.
What was it about his music that was so special to you? Maybe not when you were a kid, but especially as you were growing older and you'd listen to those recordings again. What was it that connected you with his music?
Well, first of all, what an artist. I mean, what an incredible artist. I mean, just you talk about skills, a skill set, his enunciation, his musicality, his tonality, timing, everything. I mean, everything was just exquisite with him. And he was a master craftsman. How could you not appreciate his work? So it was just, as I said, I listened to Johnny Mathis. Now, just include all the Motown stuff, but these are my little quirky things that I love, which was Johnny Mathis, Dionne Warwick, Nat Cole, classical music. I'm listening to classical pieces, Rhapsody in Blue, Leonard Bernstein, all kinds of West Side Story. I'm listening to soundtracks all the time. I was a great James Bond fan. So I listened to all of these things as a teenager. So, I mean, what Nat did as a singer was just incredible. Unfortunately, I didn't get into Sinatra until much later in life, but Nat Cole was probably held that position that Sinatra would hold in my mind.
Nat could do something with a song that no one else could. And
oh my God,
Sinatra definitely has a place in history. I mean,
oh yeah,
there is a reason why he was so successful and people still talk about him. Mm-hmm. But I got to tell you right now, no one could sing Stardust the way that Nat Cole did.
Oh my goodness. So velvety smooth.
I think that coupled with the strings of Gordon Jenkins, I mean, that along with Louis Armstrong's 1930 recording, mm-hmm. those are the definitive recordings of that song. It's haunting. Why did you feel that you needed to record an album paying tribute to his work?
Well, it was his centenary, his 100th birthday, and I just thought it would be a nice tribute to put out his works at the time. And I knew other people would be doing the same thing, but my objective was not to cover his greatest hits. This wasn't the Nat Cole greatest hits thing. It was just an ode to him, if you will. And I wanted to do some of the material that other people didn't necessarily cover. Not too obscure, but things that weren't generally touched by the public. And when I met Josh Nelson 3 years ago, I think. And when I heard him play, I said, "Man, we've got to do something." Then I found out that he had been Natalie Cole's, one of her pianists, for about 6 years. And I said, "Oh man, it'd be great to do some Nat Cole work with you." And he said, "Man, I'd love it. Let me know when." And we got together June the year before, a year ago June. I said, "Let's just record a couple of tunes, see how it comes out." And we recorded That Sunday, That Summer, and Tenderly. And I was blown away by his production, his arrangements, and I said, "Man, we've got to complete this. We got to figure out something and put the rest of this together." And so we got together and finished an album, and that's why he is the man there.
And
Yeah.
Josh is certainly a fellow of good works. I have several of his albums, and he's collaborated with a number of our artists that we play in addition to you. And the title of the album actually comes from one of Nat's recordings, which is it's not on many of the greatest hits albums, but it is a very popular song from the songbook, one from Victor Searchinger and Johnny Mercer, the ballad "I Remember You." Suppose that someone picks up your album and they have never heard the music of Nat Cole until they listen to your album. What would you hope that they would remember about Nat's music through your interpretation?
Well, first of all of the songs to me are very solid, are of solid construction, and that's lyrically, structurally. That's one of the criteria that I set out for this album. They're just good, solid songs, great lyrics, great melodies, and I think that's what I'd want people to take away from it.
But think about this as we start, kind of like a closing thought here. Suppose that someone like Nat Cole had kept on recording, and we were lucky to have them for many years thereafter. What do you think he might have done with his sound?
Well, it's very interesting because when he died, was it 65, I believe he died. The music world was changing. It was becoming more the hippie, the pop sound. Twiggy and all those were coming out, and the flashy colors and all that were everywhere. And he would have had, I think his transition would have been somewhat difficult into a more of a pop sound of the time. And I would have hoped at that time that he would stay somewhere around what he had established in terms of his musical character and his musical persona. But just a little more modern. Some of the arrangements could have been a little more modern, that kind of thing. But I don't see him. I don't see that he would have changed a lot in his approach to music. Now, I do know that when he put out Lazy Hazy, Crazy Days of Summer and all that kind of stuff, that the industry was changing around him, and there was some concern about his being a hit maker like he had been. So it would have been interesting to see.
Nicolas Bearde, our guest during In Studio from Simply Timeless. You can hear more of his music by checking out the album I Remember You. More information available at his website, nicolasbearde.com. Personal thanks to Nicolas for spending some time with us, and we look forward to the next conversation. And a word of thanks also to you for listening. We'll see you next week. Until then, I'm Jay Daniels. Thanks for listening to In Studio from Simply Timeless.